Hi everyone, greetings. My name is Seelan, and I will be doing this. I am making this series of lectures to help students clear the double A paper, right? Which has normally had one of the lower pass rates among the non strategic papers, right? Double A has posed a problem to many students, and the problem and it's definitely an issue to some students, and you can overcome the difficulties and the challenges by having the proper approach. Right now, these are my contact details if you need to get further information from me. Right. I've been teaching on this audit paper for 35 over years. Right. I've taught in five different countries actually, from Uganda, Rwanda, Malaysia, Brunei, and Vietnam, right? And so I think the appropriate approach is what is required in passing the paper. Now, you've got three types of question: theory questions, which is at times not even connected to the scenario questions, which um, it can be connected, it may not be, but the examiners seem to want to connect everything to scenarios. The ACC exams is moving towards a very practical approach. So, memorizing a lot of points is not going to be useful, right? So, you're going to get 8, 9 marks here. MCQs, 15 questions, 30 marks, scenario based, right? And it is definitely going to be scenario based. Practice of loads of MCQ questions, which is, of course, you can get it in your learning hub. You can look at BPP, Kaplan, and the likes, and they've all got questions there. Useful, definitely. And practice is important because remember, it's 30 marks, right? It's almost one third your paper. And then you get three scenario type questions, right? Which is where you get the big marks, right? Now, not all that easy on grounds that it's definitely going to be highly practical. Your ACC examiner is, as I mentioned it just shortly, just a little while ago, highly practical, right? Now, let's look at how you should start your studies. I mean, if you've, and I'm assuming you've gone for classes as such, or you are reading through some books, and therefore you need to look at the big marks, right? Audit risk and explain auditor's recommendation. Now, many students get very confused in this area if they don't come from an auditing background, because you must remember auditor's response is something that should be based on the kind of risk we have, right? And the response can be allocating more staff, more time, or even carrying out substantive procedures. And this is where students get confused. I mean, if you're not from the audit profession itself, right, they get confused on grounds that auditors respond and substantive procedure can be the same thing, right? It can be the same thing. And you need to learn when substantive procedures is required, when professional skepticism is required. And I hope to do a full lecture on that as well, right? Where we speak about the main auditor's response, right? Whether it's going to be greater professional skepticism, allocation of more time, more senior staff, or even substantive procedures, right? So it's a big mark question, right? I call it a big mark question. And then you've got to identify and recommend internal control question, right? Internal control question again can, I mean, all these questions can be up to 16 marks, mind you, right? And again, internal control question, they would ask you to identify control deficiencies. That's something that comes out most of the time. I mean, it's there in every question so far. And then most likely, not all the time, recommend deficiencies, recommend you make recommends on how you can overcome those deficiencies. And then finally, they may, which is not been the most common thing, but it's there, right? Test of controls on the recommendations you make, right? Any control recommendations you make, how do you test them? And the examiner has also varied it where identify and make recommendations, and then also asked you to identify internal controls in the scenario which you can rely on and how you test them, right? So, question 1 and 2, or rather type 1, the big marks, right? Category 1 and 2, quite confusing at times. And this is where the greatest challenge, where you need to not only, you need to understand the question and also how your knowledge can be applied to the scenarios, right? Very, very critical, ladies and gentlemen. And maybe the one of the areas where which creates the greatest, I mean, creates the greatest challenge to many students, right, over the years, which I've discovered. Substantive procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, anything between 20 to 25 marks, it can be quarter your paper. Oh, yes, it can be quarter your paper. And shall we say, this is where you got to strike most of your marks from, right? Not very tricky, right? Unless you don't read the questions carefully, the question is not tricky, and you need to make sure you can relate the substantive procedures back to assertions. Oh yeah, that's the core. Assertions, substantive procedures, right? You need to relate both of them, right? So you need to determine which are the assertions that you want to test and what are the substantive procedures that you want to look at, right? So people, the big marks, right? And the big mark questions are the ones that demotivate many students when they think that they can't, they are unable to understand it very clearly. So I hope to make a series of 2 or 3 lectures, short ones, nothing more than, none of my lectures will be more than 30 minutes, I guarantee you, on YouTube. So I hope to make it so that you get to see how the operations of the knowledge should be. Now, other area, you could get an audit report question, normally 5 marks, nothing much. And of course, impact to the auditor's report, right? Impact to audit report. Now, so we are talking about, right? Sorry, people, I need to add this on. Impact of to the audit report, right? What will be the impact? Do you qualify? Do you modify, or do you qualify, and whatnot, right? So they tend to keep it this one. I mean, quite straightforward here. And of course, because in the AAA paper, it's going to be very much more tricky with the audit report scenario. Now, criticizing audit report, it's there, but highly unlikely, right? Unless they give you a very, very short paragraph. I've just included it there for safety reasons, right? Because we can't gamble on this paper, right? And then we've got miscellaneous areas, things like analytical procedure and ratios. Now, these are some of the ratios that keep appearing again and again, right? GP liquidity, ladies and gentlemen, very likely, right? Gearing, your turnover ratios, receivable, payable, interest, as well as interest cover. Now, you need to make sure you know how to calculate them. And one of the good things in the AA paper currently is that all you got to do is calculate and put the figure in, right? Because remember, it's all computer-based exams, and therefore you only need to put the figure in. The formula itself is not necessary, right? You just need to put the figure in, and that's that, right? You either get a right or a wrong. And I believe that your ratio questions will be computer marked. Communication with those charged with governance. Again, not a very likely area, but something you should cover in order to be sure of passing, right? And the main areas in communicating with those, what you communicate with those charged with governance will be lack of evidence, what are the difficulties you face? Lack of evidence, management being difficult, any accounting issues requiring judgments, and any ethical issues, right? Again, an area that keeps appearing in very great depth in the AAA paper, right? Methods of documentation, definitely there. It comes out just as often as your analytical procedure question, right? Make sure you know flowchart narrative question, as you may be asked to describe them, speak about advantage, disadvantage, and that sort of a thing, right? So documentation, definitely something you need to look at. Now, corporate governance, weakness, and recommendation. Normally in MCQ, and very few questions have appeared so far, right? Very few questions have appeared. Now, knowing the overall materiality and performance materiality, right? It's never appeared in AAA for your information, right? Somehow, right? But they've only asked you so far to distinguish. Now, there may be a need to compute in the case study question, but not likely. But please look at it as well, right? It definitely is something that, like I said, appeared in AA, never in the AAA paper. Looking at the distinction between performance and materiality, materiality, overall materiality and performance materiality, prevention and detection of fraud and error, right? Straightforward question normally comes out in the theoretical aspect question, duty, responsibilities of the auditor and management, right? Going concern, they could ask you something on indicators and audit procedures. Now, when we speak about audit procedures as far as going concern is concerned, it would be focused on your cash forecast. Oh, yes, it would be, most of your marks will be audit procedure on your cash forecast. Engagement letter, right? Straightforward normally, if it appears. What are the elements included in the engagement letter? Half a mark for each element. They normally use the word list, right? They give you 3 marks and they expect you to give 6, right? They tell you in the exam, they would tell you 6 elements of the engagement letter, which means half a mark, in which case you merely list things like computation of fees or how fees is to be determined, right? Those sort of things. Just list it, do not explain. And of course, once they've asked, when should an engagement letter be sent, right? Before getting on to a new assignment, obviously, then of course, at regular intervals, and what are the kind of situations when you do that? Factors to be considered before accepting an engagement, right? Ethical issues, which are objective conflict of interest. You need to know the part about communicating with the outgoing auditors, ensuring you have sufficient resources with the appropriate level of competencies. Now, quality management not appeared in AA, but a current issue in the world at large. I mean, with all the scandals going on, definitely a current issue, right? Resources, right? Sufficient resources with appropriate and whatnot. And of course, your client screening, right? Making sure you take on the appropriate client. Again, like I said, not much has appeared in this area, but it's part of your syllabus. Cover it for safety reason. Ethics, normally question using MCQs, and I've listed out the main ethical issues: objectivity, familiarity, advocacy, self-interest, self-review, blah blah blah. Right? Of course, familiarity, advocacy, self-interest, self-review. These are intimidation. These are the one, and management responsibility. The ones that keep coming out again and again, right? If it appears, professional behavior and competency and due care. Now, not very much there so far with your examiner. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is merely my introductory paragraph. I hope to make a few more YouTube presentations, right? And if you need further clarification on any of the simple matters I just mentioned, please do not hesitate to contact me on this WhatsApp number or email, and I will help you as much as I can, right? Study hard. Thank you very much.